After years of being behind the scenes, public sector unions are feeling the wrath of the voters. But is it too little, too late? I'm Allen Barton. Stand by for Front Page. Joining me in studio, Brian Calle, opinion columnist for the Orange County, wow, man, too much gin in my water. For the Orange County Register, and Don Watkins, a fellow at the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights. Welcome to our new look, the Charlie Rose look with a black background. We're going for a more serious tone here on Front Page. We're going to get very sanctimonious and very sort of serious about everything we talk about with our very black background. Nope, we're just having some computer problems. All right, public sector unions now find themselves on the defensive, and voters have voted against the recall of Scott Walker, and even way out here in lefty California, San Jose and San Diego have recently voted for pension cuts. So, Brian, we'll start with you. What are the details, particularly of San Jose and San Diego, which, again, in California, land of the public sector union, the height of their power really in the country? They're feeling the heat. What's going on?
This is a huge victory, I think, for reform advocates and for people everywhere, taxpayers in particular throughout the state, and particularly in those two cities. In San Diego, basically the pension reform measure, which passed by a 2/3 margin, which is huge in San Diego, adjusted incoming employees' pay scale, specifically pension benefits. In San Jose, it went further. Not only would it adjust new employees, it also adjusts, and this is crucial, it adjusts current employees.
But isn't that the big problem? Because won't the courts say you cannot make adjustments to commitments you have already made? It's basically a contract. It's there. You made the contract. You got to pay the price. And in which case, the people incoming to the system really are going to take some.
And that's exactly why the unions basically didn't even fight this at the ballot level in San Jose or San Diego, because they were like, okay, whatever, we're going to file a lawsuit because this isn't constitutional. But I think it's still an important test because we need more precedent in the courts. So if the courts hold as they have held.
Do you think that the courts, is there any wiggle room in there for the courts to say, look, if public administrators or people on the have made contracts that are unenforceable by virtue of the fact that taxpayers cannot pay enough money to uphold these contracts, thus is the contract invalid?
Possibly. Some legal scholars say in the instance of fiscal crisis, and we define fiscal crisis however we define fiscal crisis.
20 billion deficit for one state? Would that be a fiscal
yeah,
crisis?
Well, one city. I mean, in California, it's $500 billion in unfunded pension liability. So for me, that's a fiscal crisis. And so that might be what the courts find, but I think that it's all up in the air at this point.
Don, talk to us a little bit about the notion of public sector unions at all. You know, even a liberal president as FDR was against the notion of public unions being able to collectively bargain. Why was that, and what do you see as the danger of having seen it come to life over the last 30, 40 years?
Well, think about if you and I are negotiating, right? And it's how much are you going to pay me? And if it's not enough, I'm going to go work somewhere else, right? It's a give and take. What if you and I are negotiating over some poor sap whose money is going to pay my salary and he has no say in the matter? That's in effect what public unions have done, is they've put the taxpayer on the hook for more or less an unpayable amount.
And it's a negative feedback loop because the union has a lot of money with which they influence elections. So they influence elections, get people elected who are going to give them bigger contracts, and the person who's actually paying is not there at the table at all. And that's the nature of sort of underneath it. It's almost by definition a highly corrupt, almost criminal enterprise. Once the person who's paying is not part of the negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see a situation where you have almost a new layer of government at the union level, where you say, okay, we have to run everything by the unions because the unions are the only ones who are essentially economically invested, aside from the taxpayer. And you see this particularly at school board levels, where in school board elections, unions can sway the vote so well because they're the only ones that benefit from having a school board official in power.
Well, you bring up my next topic, because here in California, I should say in a thorough piece at the City Journal, Troy Senik, he exposes this. There's a huge expose about what he calls the worst union in America, which is the California Teachers Association. So, Brian, you were just getting to that in terms of, tell us a little bit about how the California Teachers Association union runs things in California.
Well, a quick and easy example of the California Teachers Association spent the most money on lobbying in the state of California than any other entity by far just last year. Over the last 10 years, the California Teachers Association spent more money on lobbying and political contributions than any other entity by 10 times or something
But
absolutely
it's all
ridiculous.
for the children, Brian. Aren't they doing it all for the children?
Well,
Isn't this for the good of the...
You could argue that it's all for the children, but when you look at the results and the outcomes in California and how California is literally second worst in the country in terms of educational outcomes, it's really not all for the children. And what the California Teachers Association has done particularly well is to get its agenda across. It's essentially paid off, as Troy points out in his article, paid off other interests on the left by giving a little money here, giving a little money to environmental causes, and basically what they've done is they've cleared all the dissent, so they can run roughshod over anything they need to in the state legislature.
Yeah, and they let a full 0.03% of their teachers every year go. I think those are the 0.03% that actually are serial killers. But those who are convicted serial killers actually finally are kicked out of their jobs as public teachers. Don, according to the latest Gallup poll, Americans' confidence in the public school system, looking at the system over which this union sort of rules, 29%. And we've seen this continue erosion. California, in particular, used to be sort of the jewel of the public education system, including all the way up through the university system. Now it's the dog. What do you see as the influence there in terms of that transformation?
Well, I mean, the real question is, who are these 29% that think there's something good going on in the public schooling system? Look, by every objective measure, not just international, but historical, in terms of what do people actually know graduating today versus what do they know 50 years ago? I mean, there's no question there's been a complete failure. And it shouldn't be a surprise, because what incentive is there to engage in good teaching versus what incentive is there to please different political constituencies, to protect your jobs, and so on? I mean, that's why I think the government school system is just
the big proposition 10 years ago, I think, that made California contribute 40% of all of its tax revenue has to go to K through 12 education, which by fixing that money coming in removes all incentive to actually make it worthwhile. Economist Paul Krugman, well, gosh, he disagrees with all of us. He just does. He disagrees with the notion of laying off teachers or curtailing their pay. Let's take a look.
The right comparison is if we had normal job growth in the public sector, which is roughly with population. Which is what happened more or less under George W. Bush. So if we'd had that kind of job growth, instead of actually laying off 600,000 public employees, we'd have an unemployment rate that was about 1 percentage point lower just directly from those jobs. So we'd be at something like 7% unemployment, and that's not even counting the indirect effects, the fact that school teachers, if they were still working, would have money to spend on other things, and we'd have more private sector jobs too. So, this would not be a depression if we hadn't had those big public sector cuts. It would still be an economy that was underperforming, but it wouldn't be anything like the disaster that we're still experiencing.
I have an idea in regard to what he's saying, which is, a full employment program, which is that we could get rid of hydraulic tools. All those big machines that lift dirt and stuff like that. We can get a bunch of people out there with shovels, and it would be terrific. And boost public sector employment, full employment economy, and it'd be, all these swell. And all those people would have money to spend to buy a lollipop on their break. And it would be great. USSR, I think, had full employment. Oh, boy. Don, what do you think of...
I mean, I hate to admit this, but I disagree with Krugman's analysis. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, look, you're exactly right. The whole idea is, where is this money coming from to pay them? So it's, they're going to be spending this money, and isn't that wonderful? Where the heck did the money come from in the first place? It's being taken out of the hands of private investors, of entrepreneurs, of actual productive sectors of the economy, and being funneled to teachers who can't teach kids how to add, subtract, read, or write.
And Don, there's also the fallacy underneath here that a public sector job is not a job that actually has been created by necessarily a need or a product or design or production. It's being created by people forcing money via tax dollars, borrowed, spent, or printed, to go there. And thus the job exists. So it's not even particularly real job growth.
Well, your reference was very astute, about the don't use hydraulic machinery, use shovels. But Milton Friedman, famed economist Milton Friedman, said it better than that. He said, if you really want a full jobs program, forget the hydraulic machines, forget the shovels, use spoons. Just use spoons to dig up the dirt, and it'll take you longer. Everyone will be employed, and you'll have longer employment. But the issue here is that, and one of the problems President Obama is going to face, I think, in his reelect this year, is that we've seen a growth in federal government jobs by like 11%, and we're still struggling in the private sector.
As he said, the private sector is doing just fine. Let's see how that works out for him. All right, guys, good discussion for Brian and Don. I'm Allen Barton, and you've been watching Front Page.